Welcome again, everyone, to today's program. I'm Ari Goldstein, Senior Public Programs Producer at the Museum of Jewish Heritage, a living memorial to the Holocaust. It's a pleasure to welcome you. The program today is called Zachor, Yizkor Books as Collective Memory of a Lost World, and it's co-presented by the museum and JewishGen. Yizkor Books, or memorial books in English, document and memorialize hundreds of Jewish communities destroyed by the Nazis. The preservation, digitization, and translation of Yizkor Books has taken an enormous amount of work over the last 30 years, but it's been a real labor of love for each of our presenters today, and a way of honoring the Holocaust survivors who originally came together decades earlier to establish a record of the communities they once called home. Our presenters today are Avraham Groll, Executive Director of JewishGen, Joyce Field, former JewishGen VP for Research and Data Acquisition and Yizkor Book Project Manager, Lance Ackerfeld, Director of the Yizkor Book Project, and Joel Alpert, Coordinator of the Yizkor Books in Print Project. Avraham, Joyce, Lance, and Joel will each present a different part of the Yizkor Books story, and then will be available as a panel for audience Q&A at the end. So please feel free to share questions and comments in the Zoom chat and Q&A box throughout the program, and we'll address as many as we can. Thank you all for joining us today, and without further ado, I'll hand things off to Avraham.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you, Ari, so much for your introduction and for all of the work you put into organizing this program. It is an opportunity and a privilege to be able to partner with the museum in this way, number one. And number two, to be able to highlight the work of Joyce Field and Lance Ackerfeld and Joel Alpert, volunteers who have not only created the Yizkor Book Project, but continue to manage it and expand it and promote it until this very day. So we're very, very grateful for the opportunity. Welcome to everyone who's joining us from around the world. If you were part already of the JewishGen or the museum family, we're glad you're with us. If you're new, please visit our sites at jewishgen.org or mjhnyc.org. There is a lot to learn and to take advantage of, and we hope that you will avail yourselves to all that there is to offer. JewishGen's mission is simple. We seek to preserve our Jewish family history and heritage for future generations. And we do this by connecting families and trying to, at the same time, educate them about what it means to be part of the Jewish people. And the impact of our work manifests itself in a number of different ways. First, we help people identify relatives and connect with relatives by our archival collections. We collect and make accessible online in a searchable format millions of Jewish records from around the world that people can access on the JewishGen site at no charge. And in order to help people do their searches, we've created unique search tools that are specifically designed to help Jewish genealogical researchers. But we want people to understand not just who their relatives were, but how they lived. What were their values? What ideals did they cherish? What challenges did they have to overcome? What were their communities like? What lessons should we be learning from our ancestors, from the very people that we are researching? And this is where the Yizkor Book Project comes into play. The Yizkor Books mean memorial books. The Yizkor Books were written, and Joyce and Joel will talk about this. Yizkor Books were written by Holocaust survivors, generally in the decades following the Shoah, following the Holocaust. And these books were written to perpetuate and memorialize the legacy of Jewish communities. They wanted people to remember what Jewish life looked like for, in many cases, hundreds of years in Jewish communities that were now destroyed. And these books were written by survivors and spanned hundreds of pages. They were written and included photographs, and they included historical accounts of the origins of the town and biographical sketches, what life was like. We're approaching the holiday of Purim and just a month later, Passover. What was life like in the place where your family came from during various times of the year? And most of the books end with chapters focused on the Holocaust, what happened to the inhabitants of those towns during the war. Many of the books include necrology lists or lists of people presumed to have been martyred during the war. So not only do they include historical account of the town, but in many cases there's firsthand testimony of what happened during the Shoah. And these books were written predominantly in Hebrew or Yiddish, making it difficult for people to understand. Even if you're fluent in Hebrew or Yiddish, there are many, many different people editing the books. And so one of the things that we've wanted to do is to make this information accessible to the English-speaking public and to make those translations available online on our website at no charge. And this project was started by Joyce Field, and she'll discuss how it evolved over time. I want to share with you just one story that illustrates the impact that the Yizkor Book Project has. A number of years ago, before the high holidays, we received a call from a Holocaust survivor, and she had found out that we had a translation project for Yizkor Books. And she was wondering if we had translated any part of the book for her town of origin. So there are many, many books. According to whom you ask, there are over 1,000 books. And so, of course, I don't know them all at the top of my head. So I asked her, I said, what is the name of the town that you're looking for? And she tells me, so I look it up on our website, and lo and behold, there had been a project that had been initiated many years earlier. And we had about 400 pages out of a 650-page book translated into English and available online at no charge. So I was very excited. And I said, here's the URL, going to go to jewishgen.org/Yizkor/ the name of the town. And I wish you much success in going through the translations that we have available. And I'll never forget, what I imagine is that she leaned into the phone and she said to me, young man, you sound like a very nice young man. I'm 93 years old. I've never used the internet until now, and I don't plan on starting. Is there anything you can do to help? And so if we're not going to try our best to help and provide support to the survivor community, then we're missing the boat. So we realized that we were going to print out 400 pages for her and send it to her in the mail. But we realized we couldn't just print it out in small text from our regular printer. We had to go to Staples or Kinko's and put it in a binder and make the font size bigger, make it attractively designed so that it would be something that she could look through. And that's exactly what we did. And we sent it to her right before the holidays. A few weeks after the conclusion of the holidays, we received a card in the mail with a modest donation as a thank you. But then she called me, and this is what I wanted to share with all of you today. She says, I want to say thank you to you, not to me personally, but to JewishGen. And I will tell you 2 reasons. She says, first of all, one of the things that has bothered me for decades now is the fact that my children and grandchildren never seem to express any interest in hearing about my stories, about what my family life was like, the communities where we came from, who we were. And they would always say things like, Ma, you survived, it's time to move on. And we shouldn't always be stuck living in the past. And it bothered me to no end, she said, that were a time to come when I could no longer articulate these stories, who would be able to talk about them? She said, when you sent me the book and I looked at it in English, it gave me a sense in which she described menuchat hanefesh, which means peace of mind or serenity. She said, because now I know that at some point, when my children or grandchildren wake up one morning and say, you know something? Now's the time where we should really learn about where we came from. Who are we? Now there will be a book and a document in a language that's accessible to them that will tell them, here's where you come from. This is who you are. This is your legacy. And she said, that gave me such a tremendous sense of comfort. Thank you so much to JewishGen for doing that. Then she told me something else. She said that year, she unfortunately, because of mobility issues, was not able to attend synagogue for services on Rosh Hashanah, on the Jewish New Year. And it was something that she had always done in her life, and it bothered her, and she was feeling down about it. And because she couldn't make it to the synagogue, they arranged with someone in the community to come and blow the ram's horn, to blow the shofar in her own home on after services were over. And she told me how she was sitting in her house on the afternoon of Rosh Hashanah, and she's waiting for someone to come to her house to blow the shofar, to blow the ram's horn. And she's sitting there in her living room, absent-mindedly looking and leafing through the pages of the Yizkor book that we had sent her, almost as if she was in a doctor's office waiting for her name to be called, and she's flipping through a magazine waiting, not really paying attention. And that's what she's doing. She's leafing through the book. And suddenly, while she's waiting there and sort of looking, she pauses because she looks down at the book in front of her. And she's looking at a photograph inside this book in black and white. And inside the photograph is a picture of school children. And one of those children was her as a young girl prior to September 1st, 1939. And she looked in shock at this picture of herself. And she described how it opened up these visual reconnections and memories of her life before the Holocaust, remembering what it was like to grow up in the 1930s when things were not necessarily the easiest for the Jewish people, but they functioned, and she had a normal life, and she had friends, and she had siblings, and she went to school, and she had things she liked, and she had things she didn't like. And so much of her memories after the Holocaust were about remembering what happened during the Holocaust and general stories about her family. But to visually reconnect with her own sense of history and her own sense of family, she had not done in many, many, many years. She said, "Thank you, you opened up a floodgate of memories for me." And to me, this is what makes the Yizkor Book project so important, because we're connecting people with how people lived, with what life was like. We're helping people transmit that information to future generations. And Joel and Lance and Joyce are the people who are volunteers. Nearly everything JewishGen does is fueled by people who believe in our mission and who believe in the importance of our work. And Joyce initiated this project, and Lance has taken it over, and Joel has extended it to take the translations that are placed online and to make them available in book format. These are people who devote hundreds of hours of their time each month to making this information available to people on a volunteer basis. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Joyce. I want to say thank you to Joyce and to Lance and to Joel for all that they do. And I invite all of you, as you're listening to this program, use JewishGen. Visit our site at jewishgen.org. Search through the Yizkor book collections at jewishgen.org/Yizkor. There's a wealth of information. Welcome again. Hope you enjoy the rest of this program. And without further ado, I pass it over to Joyce Field.
Hello, everybody. It's gratifying to see the number of people who have signed up for today's talk on Yizkor Books, my particular passion. While JewishGen's VP of Research and Data Acquisition, I supervise 3 projects: Yizkor Book, Holocaust Database, and Jobar, the Burial Registry. In 2002, the Yizkor Book project was presented the Outstanding Contribution to Jewish Genealogy Award by the IAJGS, the International Association of Jewish Genealogical Societies. In 2009, I received the Lifetime Achievement Award by IAJGS for my work on these 3 projects. Right now, I want to discuss the characteristics of Yizkor Books. The number of published Yizkor Books can vary from 1,200 to 2,000, depending on what is included. The count is imprecise as various libraries and organizations classify books differently. Yad Vashem, for example, lists over 3,000 books in its collection as Yizkor Books, but no other institution counts that many. However, there is general overall agreement about the 1,200 number. The New York Public Library's Direct Division has over 700 Yizkor Books in its collection, many of which have been digitized and put online. Over 75% is believed are for towns in Poland, Russia, and Germany. The National Yiddish Book Center in Amherst, Massachusetts, in collaboration with the New York Public Library, digitized these books. The New York Books Center prints and sells copies of these books on demand, whereas the New York Public Library has put the material online. So what qualifies a book to be considered a Yizkor book? rather than a book of Jewish history or Holocaust history. There are no definitive rules as far as I know, but most have some or all of the following characteristics. A history of Jewish life in the town from its earliest times. Biographical data of the most prominent citizens of the town, including the rabbis. Information on such people as scholars, teachers, business and community leaders, political leaders, and artists are featured. Narratives of what happened to the town during the Holocaust, and often a listing of martyrs. JewishGen has collected these names in a necrology database. The necrologies are considered one of the most important genealogical aspects of the books, as often there are no official records of the Holocaust martyrs, and these have become proxies for the lack of other sources of information. Particularly moving are the accounts of the slaughter of Jews by the Polish residents of the town. For example, the account in the Jedwabne Yizkor book of the herding of about 1,600 residents of Jedwabne into a barn, which was then set on fire, was detailed in Jan Gross's path-breaking book, Neighbors, and how and why the perpetrators were not brought to justice is treated in his next book, Fear. Again, many have lists of survivors and where they settled after the Holocaust. These are also important lists of genealogical value. May have obituaries and photos of the deceased submitted by their relatives. May have a map of the town, sometimes hand-drawn, showing the location of shuls, mikvaot, batei midrashim, the rabbi's house, the cemetery, marketplace, and other important landmarks. Pre-war photos of the town's residents. Social history of the town, frequently written by the main author or authors or editor of the book. These narratives have great value, as often specific names are provided. Details of ordinary life written by numerous landsleit. These narratives, written by simple folk, many of whom have written nothing before but letters to their family, are in a style we are unaccustomed to, but they are moving because of their raw emotion and unadorned writing. They recall religious and secular education, sports, celebrations of Jewish holidays, vacations in the mountains or swimming in the river, Shabbat preparations, political groups, klezmorim, factional disputes. What emerges is a total picture of a civilization now destroyed, never to return. Yale Strom, in his informative and definitive book on klezmer, the Book of Klezmer, the history, the music, the folklore from the 14th century to the 21st, includes a large appendix, Klezmer Memories in the Memorial Books. I would like to quote from his introduction to this appendix, which is essentially an annotated bibliography of every Yizkor book, which had a reference to klezmer. Incidentally, the entire appendix appears on the JewishGen Yizkor Books site. If you love klezmer music, this book will be a fascinating read. What Yale wrote, what makes these books, in essence, compilations of oral histories, unique is that they not only describe in detail the occupation and eventual destruction of each Jewish community, but how complex, interesting, and diverse Yiddish culture was. The books may include a vivid and horrifying account of what happened in the early post-war years when survivors tried to return to their homes. It may include survivor testimonies describing the destruction of the Jewish community, or recounting a personal odyssey during the war years, or a short family history or basic memories of life in the town before the Holocaust. In summary, Yizkor books are important because they humanize the martyrs and survivors who the Nazis tried to dehumanize, and because they show so vividly and grippingly how our ancestors lived. Many of the first generation of American-born Jews were not interested in asking parents or grandparents about life in Europe, or if they did, they received evasive answers or explanations that they did not need to know about their ancestors' life in Europe. Yizkor books fill these gaps in knowledge. I want to acknowledge that JewishGen wasn't always consistent in what it included in the Yizkor Books site. There were a large number of important books that technically were not Yizkor Books, but couldn't be placed anywhere else on the JewishGen site. So we created a new category to include these books. We call that miscellaneous, because these books were too significant not to be accessible online on the JewishGen site. Some of the earliest entries were the books by Dr. Robin O'Neill. And then we created still another category, which we called other languages, to include Yizkor books, which have been translated into other languages. There are some wonderful stories about how these books came to be translated into English and then into other languages. Stories that will wait for another time. Now I want to briefly talk about the importance of Yizkor books. Yizkor books are some of the best sources for learning about Jewish communities in Eastern European countries. However, their contents were locked away from most researchers who could not read modern Hebrew or Yiddish. The purpose of JewishGen's Yizkor Book project, therefore, was to unlock the valuable information contained in Yizkor books by translating them into English so that genealogists, historians, families, and others could learn about their heritage and to preserve the memories of these obliterated communities, many of which had a Jewish population of over 50% of the total population of the town before World War II. The Yizkor books always talk about remembrance, Zachor. In Deuteronomy 25:17, we are exhorted to remember the evil of Amalek and to eradicate it. Remember what Amalek did to you, that you shall obliterate the memory of Amalek from under the heavens. Do not forget. Deborah Lipstadt, in Denying the Holocaust, dedicates her book to the survivors of the Holocaust and to those who preserve and tell their story. She then quotes from Deuteronomy 32:7. Remember the days of yore, learn the lessons of the generation that came before you. These words prophetically sum up the purpose of Yizkor books, to remember the lost world and books that will be passed down from generation to generation. The words memory, memories, and memorial frequently appear in discussions of Yizkor books. These words hearken to the central theme and purpose of these remarkable books. I remember reading somewhere that Zachor is mentioned about 200 times in the Bible. So the important thing is memory. In the first edition of their seminal book on Yizkor books, published in 1983 from a ruined garden, Jack Gugelmas and Jonathan Boyarin wrote, generally overlooked in the writing about the Holocaust is the single and most important act of commemorating the dead on the part of Jewish survivors. These are the hundreds of Yizkor Bücher, memorial books devoted to the lives and deaths of entire Jewish communities in Eastern Europe. After World War II, most of the towns in Eastern and Central Europe, which had had sizable Jewish populations for many centuries, some since the 13th century, were bereft of Jews, Judenrein. The remnants who had survived the war, but who were made to realize that they were not welcome in their hometowns, they left for Israel, South America, and the United States when they could, some after languishing for years in DP camps. Jan Gross, in his important book, Fear, describes the reception of the survivors in their hometowns as the unwelcoming of the survivors. He wrote, wherever they went, they were strangers, robbed of a homeland and language, but full of memories. The unpleasant ones of the war, but also pleasant ones of life before the war. The people they initially associated with were Landsleit, people from their hometown, some of whom had managed to emigrate before the war. The survivors were able to communicate with their Landsleit, whereas others did not want to hear of the horrors of the Holocaust. The Sabras and the Americans urged them to look forward, not backward, to forget Yiddish and Polish and Hungarian and learn Hebrew or English or Spanish or Portuguese, to assimilate and forget the old ways. Always they were told to forget, but they couldn't. Amos Oz, in A Tale of Love and Darkness, writes about the treatment of the Holocaust survivors in Israel. We generally treated them with compassion and a certain revulsion. Miserable wretches. Was it our fault that they chose to sit and wait for Hitler instead of coming here while there was still time? Why did they allow themselves to be led like sheep to the slaughter instead of organizing and fighting back? And if only they'd stop nattering on in Yiddish and stop telling us about all the things that were done to them over there, because that didn't reflect too well on them or on us for that matter. Anyway, our faces here are turned toward the future, not the past. The survivors were obsessed not only with the need to be a witness to the horrors of the Holocaust, but also with the need to memorialize what life was like pre-World War II. The Landsmannschaften, that is social and self-help organizations of people from the same town, took on as major projects the writing of a Yizkor book, a memorial book of their town. These books teach us the importance of preserving history and memory. The writers of Yizkor Books considered themselves to be guardians of memory. Some Landsmannschaften memorialized their towns with statues and plaques. Most, however, created a memorial on paper. These books were never published in large printings, as they were intended primarily for family, with a few copies designated for major archives such as Yad Vashem, YIVO, and the Holocaust Museum in Washington. The survivors, who had such difficulty expressing verbally what they had lost, what they had endured, and what they could never forget, wanted the world to know, but out of that overwhelming need came Yizkor Books created by Landsleit. They wrote in the languages with which they were familiar, Yiddish and Hebrew primarily. Sometimes there are chapters in Polish or Hungarian. How are they to know that future English or Spanish-speaking generations would not be able to read the books in their original languages? And so was born the Yizkor Book, JewishGen's Yizkor Book Translation Project, the object of which was to unlock the histories of these towns and the sufferings and joys of their former inhabitants, so that the world would learn and never forget. I want to touch on the importance of JewishGen's Yizkor Book Project. The history of the Yizkor Book Project is online on the Yizkor Book site, and I hope you will read this essay, which credits the founders and people involved in the development of this important project. I just want to add here that Lance Ackerfeld played a crucial part in the birth of this project, and without his efforts, it is doubtful that the project could have succeeded. He was the person who contacted the Landsmannschaften in Israel, the groups that published the Yizkor Books. The Holocaust survivors who had decided to write the history of their towns were in the mid-1990s quite elderly and unaware of computers and the internet. In addition, as most of them could not read or write English, the overriding issue was deciding the best way to reach them, to explain the intent of the project and secure their written permission, on forms written in English, no less, to put the translations online. It was also vital to overcome their reluctance to see their work made available to a worldwide audience, as they had written these books for very limited distribution, just to preserve their memories. Up to then, many felt that no one was interested in their books or the destroyed communities in Europe. Lance was the person who secured their permission. The first translation of the Stanislav, now Ivano-Frankivsk, Yizkor Book went online in October 1997, and new translations were added rapidly. The total entries include books, but also separate articles from large compendia, such as the 19-volume Pinkas HaKalilot, in which each chapter is about a different town. Chapters in the 2-volume Lita, the multi-volume Yachadut Lita, and Yiddish Shtet are also considered entries. These are important as they often describe small towns, towns too small to have a whole book written about them. Also, as often there are few secular records extant, these articles provide important genealogical and historical information. On October 5th, 1998, 1 year after the announcement of the Avraham translation, 41 translations were online and 10 more were being prepared, giving us 50 translations submitted in the first year of this project. On May 28, 1999, the 100th translation had been uploaded. 2000 was a significant year. In early 2000, Lance took on the duties of webmaster. Late in June 2000, the data sharing agreement with Yad Vashem would be signed, leading to significant collaboration between Yad Vashem and JewishGen's Holocaust database and Yizkor Book project, particularly the necrology database. In August 2000, JewishGen and the Holocaust Museum in Washington developed an informal agreement on procedures for collaboration, which would positively impact all JewishGen projects, not just the Yizkor Book project. In December 2000, the Yizkor Book necrology database went online. The Yizkor Book project grew substantially in size and stature in the next 2 decades. And I hope Lance will fill you in on those future achievements. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joyce. And now we'll turn things to Lance.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Lance, the Lance that Joyce talked about. I've been involved in the Yizkor Book project from around 1999, for about the last 10 years, I've been leading the project. Joyce asked me to fill in a few of the statistics, so I will. Around the time that I joined the project, we had 155 projects and we had 164 entries. Looking back on 2020, at the end of the year, we had 927 projects and we had 2,322 entries, which goes to show that we've expanded quite a lot over the years. I think Joyce explained to you what the entries are. Many of them come from larger Yizkor books that they mainly places that don't have their own Yizkor books, and others have an entry in the Pinkasei Kehilot, that the Encyclopedia of Jewish Communities that were published by Yad Vashem. I also counted up the number of completed translations that we have and found that we had 182, which is great. And I'm really hoping that by the end of 2021, we'll be able to reach the number 200, maybe even more. We're slowly getting there. I see progress on a day-to-day basis. Most of the translations we receive come from professional translators. The cost of translating a single page is usually around $30 to $5 for a single page. If you consider the fact that the usual Yizkor book contains 400 or 500 pages, it's easy to understand that it's quite an incredible outlay to translate a whole book. So what we do in a case like this, if we have a book that people are interested in translating, we set up a dedicated Yizkor book, translation fund, sorry. And so that all the people that are interested in seeing the book translated can donate however, whatever they're able to contribute to the fund. And then JewishGen uses the funds to pay the translators, and the translators pass on the work to us. We have around 60 of these translation funds currently ongoing, and around the same number of updates going on each month. So you can understand that there is a great deal of activity going on. Just a little bit about my own involvement. I'm a volunteer, as I said. I have to juggle my time because I also I'm currently still working full time, but I'm not complaining. I get a great deal of satisfaction working with the other volunteers, of seeing the project develop. And the icing on the cake, in fact, is seeing that the books we've translated go to publishing, and that Joel Alpert will expand a little bit about that. And I hope to continue doing what I'm doing as long as I have the energy. And I'd like to hear from anybody that has seen something of interest, heard something of interest in the talk tonight. And I thank you for your time. I'll pass you on now to Joel. Thank you.
Hello, I am Joel Alpert, creator and coordinator of the Yizkor Book in Print project. I will tell you about the project of publishing these Yizkor books that Lance and Joyce spoke about, how to access them on the web pages of JewishGen, and some of the benefits of actually studying the Yizkor Book. This project is an offshoot of the Yizkor Book project that translates the books. The Yizkor Book in Print project publishes the books only after they are fully translated and posted on the Yizkor Book website. Let me show you first how to get to the Yizkor Book website from the JewishGen website, and then locate a town of your choice. So this is the Yizkor Book website that you get to, sorry, the JewishGen website that you get to when you open up JewishGen. If you go over to research and find Yizkor Books and click on that, then you get to this website, the Yizkor Book website. First, let's look at how we get to the translations. You click on that, that brings you to the Yizkor Book website, which gives all sorts of information about how to help with the translations and donations and so on. And the translations are over here in alphabetical order. So you go there and then pick out the particular website, sorry, the particular town you're looking for. This is what you typically get at the top of the page. Talks about the book, the translation, who the translation coordinator is, and so on. And then further down, you get the table of contents. Notice here that all of these articles are in blue. That means a hyperlink to that material. And if you click on it, it'll get you to the material. Now, not all books are fully translated, and there you'll find black in just the title of the town. So you might ask, Joel, the material is already on the website. So why bother publishing a hardcover out of the book? I've been asked this often. Well, I'll offer you two good reasons. Many people prefer to read this kind of material in book form and not just stare at the web for possibly 800 pages, some of them are. Secondly, I believe people actually want a hardcover volume to be on their bookshelves so that they can show their children and grandchildren when they finally ask, where did Sadie and Bobby come from? Well, this is their history. Sure, one can print off pages from the web, and then you've got a stack of papers. Whereas our books, which are hardcovers, are sold at nearly our cost and have very appealing covers and have permanent value. Here's an illustration of one. Now, all work done to produce the books is done by volunteers so as to keep the cost as low as possible. We use the print-on-demand technology that allows us to upload the files of the books to our printers. Then the books can be ordered in as few as one at a time and individually printed. No need to order and store a backlog of books. This is ideally suited for our operation. We started operation with our first book in 2012. And now, 11 years later, in February 2021, we have published 115 titles out of the approximately 200 finished books that Lance mentioned, and that's since 2012. And we have sold actually 10,300 total books in the Yizkor Book Project. And for the future, we plan to publish every book that Lance can manage to get to us that is fully translated. In the past, we've been publishing about 12 titles per year. This past year, we published 21 titles because we have more volunteers doing specific parts of the job, who copy and paste the material from the web pages and then format it and would add an index of names according to the pagination of our books that the original Yizkor books did not have. And our graphic designers create interesting covers shown here for Rat Now and for Dusit in Lithuania. We upload the files to our printer, and after their approval, we're able to announce the publication of the book. And then we send out announcements to the various JewishGen list servers, and then send out very targeted announcements to people who have signed up for the JewishGen family finders for the particular town. And when you go to the list there, you can see that, for instance, it says you can send out a message. Here I could send out a message to this researcher and this researcher telling them that we've published a book that they're going to be interested in. Now, what is the benefit of Yizkor Books other than letting us understand the environment of the towns of our ancestors? And don't let me minimize that, because that's a very important piece. Often overlooked by genealogists who are only looking for names in the books. They should really be looking also at where and about the towns they came from. From my own personal experience, reading the Yerberg Yizkor book has led me to finding relatives in Mexico from whom we were isolated for 70 years, and other relatives who were stuck behind the Iron Curtain and finally immigrated to Israel. Neither of these groups had any idea that they had a huge family in the US. So they were thrilled to find that they were not isolated and had a huge family. For me, this added a huge dimension, another dimension to my life. And to them, it was even more important because they knew they weren't alone and they had family who cared about him. At one point, I reached out to the head of the Judaic section of the Harvard University Library, which has a huge section of original Yizkor books in Hebrew and Yiddish. And he told me, Alpert, we know about your books. They're really excellent, but you've got to get these translated books archived because it represents the intimate history of the Jewish communities before the Shoah and firsthand accounts of the destruction of our Jewish communities of Eastern Europe. So as a result, about 2 years ago, we started archiving the electronic files of our books to these institutions: the Harvard University Library, YIVO, the Holocaust Museum, National Library of Israel, Yad Vashem, and so on. Now, one day I looked back and started to think about what do we really have as a result of Lance and Joyce's work. Lance quoted about $35 per page. I'm using $40, which is also close to translate. The books typically are 300 pages or more. So that means it costs $12,000 to translate the book. And now, for the at least 100 or so books that we've already put on the web, published in hardcover, that means the translation cost ran to $1.2 million. That's quite some treasure. And that's not all, because Lance has many, many more books that are in partial translation. So it's really an amazing treasure that we have. We're literally sitting on an incredible treasure of the intimate history of the Ashkenazi communities that so many of us came from. So now I'd like to show you a couple of steps of how to get books to order. Here was the Yizkor Book webpage that we got to, and here's the Yizkor Book in print webpage. That gets you to the main page, which first describes some background, and then below it, there are 115 entries like this, which describe the book very briefly, and then you can click here and get to more detailed description. And on the bottom, notice here, for instance, this I think was about a 400-page book. The list price is $62.95, but we sell it at JewishGen for $37.95 because we want to offer the books at the best possible price. Now I want to give you a hint of what the and then when you click on that, you get to the order form here, and there you go. So I want to give you a hint of what you might find in the Yizkor books based upon my experience. This was the book. Inside the book, I found a page in English. This is before we even translated it. And this says, this is a list of people, of your burgers living outside of the US. And the yellow are all people on my family tree. And then I noticed this, and I had been in contact with all of them. And then I found this fellow, Jay Cossid in Chicago. So I called him up and begged him to talk to me. Don't hang up. I'm not selling anything. I'm looking for people from your burg. And I mentioned to him about the Krelitz family, which is my mother's side. And he said, Krelitz, he said, Moshe Krelitz, pictured here, from Jack's photo album that he created when he left the town in 1937 at age 20 years old. Here is Jack. He said, oh my God. And he was so happy to connect up with family members of his mentor and people he knew quite intimately. Here is Jack at a reunion in 1998, and here is a nephew of Moshe Krelitz. Here's a picture of Moshe and his sister Leah, who was the mother of Max in the previous picture, and here's other family members. None of them survived except for Leah because she went to visit a sister in Mexico in 1939 and was told, do not come back under any circumstances. We want to get out. Here's a picture of Moshe and Leah in the Nieman River, which went by Yerberg. Here's a picture of Moshe in the Tel Aviv park, the one park that toward the beginning of the Holocaust was only allowed Jews, or Jews were only allowed in it. And notice this big rock behind it. And just to show you how important it is, here's that big rock again in 2010 with a bunch of cousins, including myself, the daughter of Leah, who went to Mexico, and the son of Max Zarnitsky, who was an architect and designed Bauhaus buildings in Tel Aviv. So we had quite a time. So you can see how important Yizkor Books can be. Now, last Saturday, I got a call from a fellow who just opened up a Yizkor book that he ordered because his family came from that town. He immediately spotted a picture from the 1920s with an image of a student that he said looked exactly like him when he was that age. He is guessing that it was his own great-grandfather. Another good reason to search Yizkor Books, in addition to all of those reasons the previous speakers gave. So there is much to be gained from these Yizkor Books. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Joel, Joyce, Lance, and Avraham. I want to invite all of you to turn your videos back on as we take some audience questions now. This is terrific. And thank you everyone who's submitting questions. We are recording today's program and we'll share the recording via email tomorrow, along with some of the resources and links and books that have been mentioned. So stay posted for that. Let me be judicious with the time that we have remaining. We have a couple questions from Dana and from Lorena Hirschman about the process of creating the Yizkor Books. I wonder if one of you could describe more, how did survivors who lived all over the world in different places come together and actually record their collective memories? And was there a process of vetting which memories were true, or if there were contradictions between different stories?
For each Yizkor book, there was a group of landslide. And so they formed a committee to write a Yizkor book. And there was usually one person who was the major editor. And there were enormous disputes. And they divvied up chapters to various people. So each translation project is very different. The editors made decisions which weren't always helpful. And there were enormous disputes on which political groups in that town they might describe, but it was usually a group that formed from the landslide, okay? And so they were the ones who wrote, they assigned chapters to various people, they made all the editorial decisions. So each Yizkor book is quite different, obviously. They tried to follow some patterns, but as we know, when you have a group of Jews, if you have 3 people, there are going to be 10 different opinions. So there were a lot of factional disputes about what would be included, sometimes depending upon their political or religious affiliations. So there isn't one pattern, but they usually had a group formed to write or compile the Yizkor book.
I guess that part of Jewish heritage is well recorded in the books. A couple questions about people who are searching for information about their family who lived in major cities like Odessa, places where Yizkor Books don't reveal the same kind of information. What would you suggest for people who are pursuing that type of research? Any of you should feel free to jump in.
Well, there are lots of books in addition to Yizkor Books that are written about the Holocaust. And, they could go to the library, they could go online. There's just an enormous amount of material, especially about these major cities. there are a lot of other historical books that are written.
I guess JewishGen as a whole is really part of the answer there.
Yeah.
Ari, can I just add something to what Joyce just mentioned? There are a couple of interesting tools that people can utilize. One, Joel mentioned the JewishGen Family Finder. That is a really incredible resource that people can use to connect with others who are researching the same information that they are. So if my last name is Groll and you're interested in someone else who's also researching the name Groll, we could connect. You can do that by town or by country. So that might be a pathway in terms of trying to research your roots. There's also something else on JewishGen called Kahila links. You could find it on our homepage under the resources tab, on the research tab. Those are the equivalent of virtual memorial books. So these books that we've been talking about that survivors put together, these virtual memorials that JewishGen has organized are from volunteers who are interested in towns where their families came from, and they have photographs or they've gone to the town and they've shared information or research advice. So there's still a lot on JewishGen itself. The last thing I would mention is we have the discussion group. And one of the great things about JewishGen is the power to unite people wherever they are from around the world. In fact, that's how JewishGen got started. It was an early online bulletin board designed to help people connect. And someone could go on our discussion group and they could search to see if a town has ever been mentioned, or if a name has ever been mentioned, if a topic has ever been mentioned. And if not, they could start a topic and connect with thousands of other people around the world. So someone might say, I'm researching my family from Odessa, and here's what I know about them. Does anyone have any research advice? Can anyone guide me? And post the message. And they might be very surprised that someone else out there might have information and might respond to them.
Thank you. Let me close with one question that takes us a little bit bigger. Yizkor Books are an amazing model for recording communities that were lost. There are other communities that have that sense of loss, American Indian communities, communities that experience genocide or displacement besides the Holocaust. Have any of you in your work with Yizkor Books interacted with people from other communities who are looking to copy the Yizkor Book model or share a similar type of experience?
No, I don't recall that.
That's okay.
No.
Well, thank you so much for sharing this amazing wealth of information with us. And there's so many great comments in the chat. I just want to end with, I'll read this one from Natalie. She said in the middle of this program, I just found the translation of my mother's town on your website. I moved to tears. Thank you. So we hope that more people have experiences like that. And I want to pass it off to Avraham to close us out.
Thank you, Ari. I want to say thank you again to Joyce and to Lance and to Joel. They don't get the recognition they deserve for all of the work that they do. The JewishGen Yizkor Book project does not exist without each of you. So thank you on behalf of someone who personally has benefited from the Yizkor Book project, and for the many thousands of people who utilize these books in various forms and formats, but take advantage of the countless hours that you have devoted on a continual and continue to do so. So we say thank you to you. I would just invite everyone to learn more about the project at jewishgen.org/Yizkor, Yizkor. If anyone would like to get involved in a volunteer way to help manage projects, there's a volunteer form on our homepage, jewishgen.org. Please submit the form. Let us know what skills you have and what your interests might be, and we'll match you. And finally, if you're interested in funding one of the projects that we have, or if you'd like to fund a project, please be in touch with Lance directly. His email is Lance L. Ackerfeld, L-A-C-K-E-R-F-E-L-D @jewishgen.org. And we are glad that you participated today. If you have any further questions at all, you can go on our discussion group. Again, that's linked on the homepage, and post messages and interact with a global community of people who are really here to help And so with that, I thank you all again. Thank you, Ari, for giving us this opportunity and this platform, and wishing you all a wonderful rest of the day.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.